welcome to the Estee Show. I am so excited for today's episode for two reasons. Number one, the topic and guest are absolute fire. Number two, the release of this episode puts the Estee Show into the top 1% of podcasts. No, not an April Fool's Day joke. It's totally legit. I'll explain the math in a bit. In this episode, our guest is Ben Erez. We're diving deep into product management, dissecting the dream scenario of product-led organizations versus the oh-so-common reality of feature factories. Spoiler alert, most companies fall into the latter category. And who better to guide us through this product management jungle than Ben Erez? Ben is a product management veteran, having navigated the waters of both a giant like Facebook and the exciting and often chaotic world of startups, where he was an early product hire at Attentive and other companies. His perspective is refreshingly honest, down to earth, and full of practical tips for product managers struggling to bridge the gap between the daily grind and their ideal product management vision. I think the conversation is crucial and necessary, and I'm excited to see where it goes. Heads up, this episode is a bit spicy with a few curse words that I've chosen to leave in for maximum impact. Now, let's talk about that top 1% milestone. Did you know that according to Chris Walker, 99% of podcasts didn't make it past 20 episodes? And yes, that means that the 21st episode, this one now, puts us among the elite. Huge thanks to all of you, amazing listeners, for helping me reach this point. We wouldn't be here without you. But there are two people who got me off the ground and got me into a routine without whom we wouldn't be here today sharing this amazing conversation. That special shout out goes to Frank and Francisca. Next time, I'll take you behind the scenes of the Estee Show, sharing some of the crazy stories that led us here and the biggest lessons I've learned along the way. As always, I love hearing your thoughts. Product management pro or newbie, your feedback is gold. Hit that follow button on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Give us a heart, and let's get into it with Ben. Ben, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Estee. Really excited.
Let's tell the audience a little bit about the controversy that's been blowing up the product management world and the central role that you're playing there, and why I'm so excited to connect with you today. Marty Kagan, who is the patriarch of product management, founder of the Silicon Valley Product Group, advises the top technology firms on product management and how product management is done, is advocating for companies to be product-led, was on Lenny Rachitsky's podcast 2 weeks ago, where Lenny posed him with a problem. A lot of product managers in companies that might not be Facebook or Google are struggling with the reality that's very far from what that quote unquote ideal product management should be, where the company gives you a problem and then gives you a blank canvas to do your research, to do your analysis, to come up with hypotheses to test them. In this world, there are CEOs or founders or leaders who are telling product managers, actually, you should just build A, B, C, D. We know what's going to work. And then product managers are expected to churn it out. And he referred to that as feature factories. So the conversation got into people feel stuck. What's your advice? And Marty's advice was you should revolutionize the organization you're in. And the organization is going to benefit from becoming a product organization. Let's take a listen.
Too many people in our industry view themselves as a victim of their company. Like they're stuck in a feature team and there's nothing they can do about it other than quit. But really, most, they have a family, they're not going to quit. So I think that's not true. I think there is so much they can do. And hopefully they can see that in the book. It's like they can see what they individually can do to push their company in this direction. And at a minimum, it'll help their career.
Now, I heard that. I thought this is so interesting. I felt really frustrated. I speak with product managers all the time. I've been a first product manager, an early product manager in startups. And then I saw your post. And Ben, you hit the nail on the head. It was a long post, but I'll just read out a small part of it where you said, I am a Marty Kagan fan, but he's missing the point here. And you said, I speak and I know a lot of PMs who feel stuck, but when they try to implement change, here's what actually happens. I'm quoting you. Here's how I've seen this advice play out. PM embraces agency to change their company culture from rewarding outputs to rewarding outcomes. They start saying no to feature requests and attempt to refocus projects on problems to make space for product discovery. Sales leaders perceive the PM to slow down velocity instead of accelerate it. The PM, who quote unquote won't play ball, depletes their social capital within the company, and loses the ability to influence leaders, killing any chance of the PM advancing a new outcome-focused product initiative. When performance reviews come around, the PM is grilled for being neither collaborative nor impactful. I don't know why Marty doesn't address this, and I don't want to speculate. And then you go on to give your own advice to PMs. I read that and I was like, boom, this guy hit the nail on the head. And clearly I wasn't the only person who thought that, because over 1,400 people reacted, over 200 comments. Marty responded himself, 44 reposts. You clearly hit a nerve. From my experience myself and product managers I've spoken with, the result is very often impacted by layoffs, job eliminated, replaced by a project manager or scrum manager. Because the reality is, when someone says, hey, we don't want to be a feature factory, but we want to do user discovery, the underlying message is, we don't trust you, whoever's requesting the feature, to know that this is the best feature. And it requires a huge amount of humility and a change of mindset to say, hey, this person who I thought was doing one job could actually do a different job, even if it is better for the organization. Ben, handing it over to you. What was your whole experience hearing this, responding, and the reaction since then?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for framing that up. I think that was really well said. I'm happy that I was not the only one feeling what I was feeling listening. And like I said, I am a Marty Kagan fan. I've enjoyed Inspired as a book about customer and like product discovery. I've enjoyed Empowered, which is all about product leadership. I've been the guy that's actually referring Marty's material to people over the years because I think there's a lot of value in it and things to learn from it. When I found out that he was releasing a new book called Transformed, I was actually really excited. And I'll be honest, I haven't read it yet, and I'm not sure whether I will based on what I've seen so far. But the reason I was excited about the concept of the book Transformed is because I thought it was going to be a seminal piece about how to actually get companies to transform internally from being the exact description of what you called feature factories to being more empowered product teams. And I think Marty's now calling this like running the product model. What seems to be the basis of the book is more about how Marty took what I conceive to be the top 1% of Silicon Valley companies, how they behave, which tends to be in an empowered fashion, and then to coach teams outside of Silicon Valley on how to become like the top 1% of Silicon Valley companies. And to me, the big gap there is, what about the other 99% of Silicon Valley companies? And a lot of my experience is that the vast majority of Silicon Valley companies are run by extremely opinionated founders who often are coming from some kind of go-to-market business background, but sometimes they're coming from an engineering and product background. But regardless of where they're coming from, there's often, especially in the B2B SaaS world, this idea that we know what we need to build, and our job is to execute on the roadmap and put the right product in the hands of customers. And there's a level of conviction at the top of the company for where to best spend time. And like you said, if someone internally wants to put the brakes on that machine, it can be very damaging. And so that's the context. Now, what I think is missing, or what I think the dissonance might be, is that when you've been spending as much time as Marty and other kind of like consultants about coaching teams on how to do product, you're every day you're doing that is a day you're not in the seat. And if you do that for decades, then you've fallen out of touch with what the actual reality on the ground is. And I think that's the part where I probably have over indexed in the last decade. Like, I've been in the seat just like you. I therefore know a lot of people that are in the seat. So when there's a dissonance between the advice that I'm hearing and what I'm seeing on the ground play out, and especially when you're a thought leader who people look up to, I think you have a responsibility to give people advice that's not going to hurt them, or at least to call out the risks of following your advice if you think there's a chance that it could hurt them. And so the purpose of my post was to try to do that. It felt like an addendum to the advice that was being given. And the last thing I'll say before I hand it back to you is that, to me, the biggest thing that's missing from, and I don't want to like pile on Marty. I think there's like a whole army of people in Marty's camp that are, I think, espousing the same kind of like ideologies and philosophies. Is I think they've lost touch a little bit about what the job is of product management. The job is to do what will, like, to serve the business. It's to help the founder and the CEO build the company that they want to build. And they Our job is not to tell the founder what kind of company to build. It's not to tell them what kind of culture to build. It's to be in service of the founder CEOs, to flesh out the vision and bring it to life and execute on it at the highest bar possible. And I think that when you say that feature factory PMs are just glorified project managers, I think that's a huge discounting of the amount of actual product work that has to happen to properly execute on a roadmap. Because sometimes a feature comes in and it's just a very vague features. It's literally one sentence, and you're supposed to translate that into something that's going to deliver the intended value and hit the mark for the customer that it's meant to serve. Now, I'm not saying I enjoy doing feature factory PM work as much as I enjoy doing empowered product work, because I've done both, and I think the latter is much more enjoyable for me personally. I think it's more rewarding and more creative and more interesting and strategic. But I will say that when I have done feature factory PM work, it is an actual job that is not project management. You still have to work with design and engineering and stakeholders and customers to make sure you're delivering the right solution for the right problem. Whether you agree with that problem being the right problem to focus on is a separate question that in feature factories, there's not a lot of space to debate.
I think it would be helpful to go into a little bit of definition mode. Let's give examples, practical examples of what a feature. Let's take, let's say, a same company, and we could invent it. We could say this is company X, Y, and Z, and here's what it produces. In a feature factory, here's what it would look like, the mandate versus the expected result, versus a similar thing in the same type of company that's product led.
Yep.
Here's an example that I can share. And thank God there's no lack of examples. I've worked at a number of companies and I speak with PMs every week who are more than happy to share their experience. So we'll keep it anonymous. But one of the companies was interested in rolling out a new program. It was a telehealth company and they wanted to offer a new offering to their patients. Head of strategy looked at a competitor in the space who was offering that program, came to the product manager and said, "Hey, they're successful. They just raised a ton of money. So just take what they have and replicate it." We can do the fast forward where that was exactly what the team did. They replicated within the timeline, launched, everything worked, passed testing, amazing. And then boom, what happened? It was a total failure. Why? Because there were a couple of key points along the way that the competitor had that this company didn't have, but they didn't know because they didn't go into any research to understand why are customers signing up for this service? What is attracting them to the service? For example, one of the things was the medication that they were offering. This competitor had a deal with the drug manufacturer that they could guarantee a low price. And this, we're talking about a difference between $20 and $1,000 for a drug. If you're just saying, "Hey, we're just offering this medication," but aren't taking that one thing into account and you don't have that relationship with the drug manufacturer, the difference between the service you're offering and this competitor is offering is $980 a month. So that's huge. But if you're just going in and saying, "We're just going to develop it as you say it," that's how you land. So that's an example that I've witnessed that was very feature factor-esque.
Hmm.
Maybe you and I can rethink how that would look in a company that's truly product led, somewhat product led, could be more product led. And for a product manager who's, to use the language we've been using, stuck or finds themselves in such a situation, what's the best way to navigate given the environment?
Yeah. So such an interesting example, and I've been in this exact situation where there's a competitor doing something, you feel like that thing should exist in your ecosystem, and if you don't create it in your ecosystem, then the customer is going to have to use both solutions, and maybe you get paranoid that if you don't build the thing that the competitor is doing, then they're going to build the thing you're doing, and then the ultimate consolidation for the customer is going to happen in the competitor's product versus your product. So I've been in this situation. I haven't done this in healthcare with drugs and things like that, but I think that the preamble to the kind of advice is just when you're evaluating joining these kind of companies, it's good to just ask some questions that help you understand whether these types of situations are likely to come up in that company. And we could have a whole separate conversation about that. But let's assume you're just there. So if you're the product manager on the ground, and I think some people call this like the line PM, who's tasked with this project, there's some things you can do. If you're the chief product officer or the VP of product on the leadership team, there's things you can do. And then I think if you're the CEO or the person that's ultimately calling the shots at the company, there's things that you can do if you want to move into a more empowered product culture. Now, let's follow that chain from the top to the bottom, right? So if the CEO just says build it, there's not much room for the VP of product to push. But if the VP of product or the chief product officer wants to push back, they could try to have a strategy discussion with the CEO, right? And understand, hey, like, here's the vision that hasn't changed for the company. Here's the mission that hasn't changed. Is this initiative in service of the vision and mission? Let's just say it is, right? What's the opportunity cost maybe of doing this? What do we have to drop to make space for focusing on this? And is that a worthwhile trade off? Do we think this actually is higher impact for the business, for our customers, and the other stuff that we're already planning on doing or that we could do instead of it? And if that conversation lands on actually the VP of product, chief product officer are still convicted that this thing is worth doing and it's more important than the other things that are being done, then by the time that you catch wind of this as the PM on the ground, are you really going to change their mind? And I think the answer is probably not. I'm curious to get your thoughts on that. We could talk about what you do as the ICPM, but I feel like all of the things you could do are probably based on that initial assessment of could you change their mind or not, and is it even worth trying? What do you think?
Saying to someone, do you want to keep on failing? You're essentially telling them, no matter how nicely you do it, that you're a failure or this isn't working. And you need that person in that seat to be willing to say, maybe that person is right. And most people in that seat won't. They got as far in their life. They think they're really smart. I don't know if you saw, do you follow Itamar Gilad?
A little bit. I don't know this stuff too well.
One of the stories in his book is about a product manager at Amazon who said, you know how in the physical store, when you're checking out, there are all of these gums and chocolates, and they're there to do impulse purchases so that you end up spending more. So he said, we should figure that out in the digital world. And his VP of product told him, no, that's a horrible idea, would never translate. And instead, he just ran an A/B test, and it ended up being super successful. And that was bundle payments. He shared the results with the VP, and now that's common practice in the e-commerce world, and Amazon spearheaded it. And all I was thinking as I was reading was, that's crazy. In the world in which I live, that VP of product would have fired that PM, being like, I told you no, and you still went ahead and ran that test, and the data's probably messed up.
I think
So,
that those
yeah,
relationships are so critical though, right? When you think about what needs to be true for that maneuver to be successful, right? It's
which
I think
maneuver? The Amazon maneuver?
for the PM essentially going against what the VP and maybe even the CEO says to do what they think is right. There's an element of you're putting your neck on the line. If it works, like, you're gonna make them look good, and then you're probably gonna get celebrated. If it doesn't work, you're probably fired. Like, you broke that trust in an irreparable way. Now, my guess, I haven't heard the story fully, but my guess is that given that most PMs are risk averse, like, kind of the job in a lot of ways is to mitigate risk, most
Mm.
PMs will not put their neck on the line in that sense because it's very risky, right? So what instead I think really effective PMs, and I want to say maybe I'm just not one of them, but these people do exist where they can push back in a very diplomatic, very positive, like relationship affirming, ego affirming way for the people above them that makes them want to do the thing that you want to do, but makes them think it was their idea in the first place. And because you're showing up as low ego, they don't get defensive when you bring the idea. You're simply facilitating and advising them on a better way to maybe think about trying something that they already want to try. There's like a whole art. It's a lot of like very soft skills that's very deliberate and strategic that I think some percent of PMs probably know how to do. But I think if you are very direct and maybe slightly less in control of tone and emotions and slightly less mindful of the perception and the egos, and you don't want to stroke someone else's ego because it feels like a distraction from doing the work. Like, I can fall into this bucket sometimes for sure, that I just want to do great work. I think it can be hard to make space for being that influential. And maybe that there's just like a survivorship bias with these stories where you hear about the ones that work well from some people because they got what they wanted and now they tell everyone about it. But I think for every one of these stories, there's probably 100 stories about the PM that did what they thought should be done anyway, and it fucking blew back in their face. Like, it hurt them. Not everyone creates a new paradigm for e-commerce when they go against what the VP tells them to do.
And the whole idea, I think, of product management and testing hypotheses, the idea is that most things you test will not work out. They will fail.
And the
So,
decision of what to test in the first place is where most of this stuff really gets tense. Because once the PM, think of it like alignment between layers of the hierarchy. If the PM is really excited to test something that the VP is really excited to test, that the CEO is really excited to test, that's when magic happens. Those have been the times I've been most excited and energized by what I've done in my career, where I felt the most engaged, like I'm contributing the most. I had no problem at all influencing my stakeholders to get everyone in the same page. And then the execution speaks for itself at that point, because that's where you're just like pumped to deliver the best possible thing within the constraints that you have. I think where it gets tricky is when there's any misalignment between these layers. And so going back all the way to the original example, like if you're the PM in this environment where the CEO and the VP are aligned, and you're probably not going to push back, because it's hard to give advice to push back in that situation, especially thinking about your financial responsibilities. Maybe you have a family, maybe you've got a mortgage, whatever. Like you probably just can't afford to lose your job, or if you don't want to lose your job and you want to keep your job. And maybe you've been in the job for 6 months at this point and you don't want to hit the job market again because you haven't even been in the role long enough to tell a compelling story about what you did there. So you're trying to think about the next interview process and you're like, I'm not prepared to hit the job market right now. So I need to stay in this job. So I think in that situation, all you can really do is start to chip away at the ambiguity, right? Start to bring the thing into definition and to figure out what's in scope and out of scope, and to try to talk to your product marketing partners and try to get some kind of go to market motion underway that's going to increase the chances that it's going to land in the right way. I think the competitive analysis at this point is probably like meh, because you're already doing it. So mostly maybe you want to figure out how to equip your sales team with the right talking points on how this is differentiated in the market. And I've seen that responsibility shared between product marketing and PMs in different capacities. You need to give your engineering team enough clarity so they can start maybe working on the architecture and like the underlying systems that will power whatever kind of experience you bring to life. You need to get your design partners to understand the context around this whole thing and start to figure out where it might live. Like, where does this thing exist? Does it exist as its own product? Is it a feature within the existing product? And often that part of figuring out where the thing lives is the thing that, if you read a lot of the comments and these threads about feature factories, the long-term debt that you accrue as a founder, as a CEO, when you're building feature factories, is that you end up with this very bloated product, because God knows people
mm-hmm.
hate killing features. I'm a huge advocate
Yeah.
for killing features. I think there should always be, just like if you're running an organization and you want to manage out the bottom performers in your company, like why not manage out the bottom features in your product over time? I think it makes sense. But I think that's not how people behave. How people behave is they just add and add and add and add features. And because a lot of these features get built in a way that's not super long term, there's not a lot of foresight and strategy that goes into like how these pieces fit together over time at these feature factory companies. Often the collaboration between the PM and the designer ends up feeling like we just gotta stuff this thing somewhere. It just needs put it in a drawer somewhere, and we'll just make sure that when we go to market, we'll just link people directly to it. But if people are using the main product, they don't have to find it. We could bury it. And then fast forward, you execute on that plan, you go through all the leadership reviews, everyone's on the same page about where this thing lives, it's on track, you've got some maybe date that you've now started cementing from like a launch perspective. It goes live, and to your point, there's crickets. Either there's crickets, or sometimes worse, it actually gets a tremendous amount of exploration, but then it completely misses the mark. This is actually
I've
what
seen
happened.
those too, by the
Oh my
way.
God,
Tell
it's
me.
everywhere. And not to get off track, but if you think of like Envision Studio, if you remember that product, like Envision did this massive go to
The
market.
alternative to Figma?
Yes, this is before Figma hit its stride, and Sketch was still dominant, and Vision was the main thing people used to share prototypes, and they decided we're going to build Sketch into our product. We're going to build this thing called Envision Studio, and they did this like super sick highlight reel of like how awesome Envision Studio is going to be, and everyone got excited, and they launched, and a bunch of people checked it out, and it just sucked. Like it just did not work really well. So that's actually how it goes when it goes well from a go-to-market perspective on one of these just build it kind of situations. And then on the flip side of that, you could just build it and no one's going to care. And I think either of them are not good outcomes. I think just to like steel man the reason to operate this way is every once in a while, you might actually say, just build it. And then you build it and things line up and actually delivers the value to the customer that they wanted. The salespeople are really happy. They maybe start feeling like they can close deals that they couldn't close until before they had this feature. I just in my experience, I've really struggled to get sales teams or CEOs to even look back on the thing that we did and be like, did it hit the mark or not? Because usually feature factories
Right.
are just
That's so
constantly
true.
focused on churning out the next thing, and they don't stop and look back at the impact of the thing they did. So as a PM, you're like spending all this time and energy doing this thing you're not even that excited about, and then it ships, and then before there's a new thing you have to just work on. And you're like, hold on, did that work? And they're like, it's your job to figure out if it worked. And I didn't even think about. I was never even clear in the first place on like measuring success for this thing. I just did it because I was told to do it. And this is, I think, where Marty pushes back. And where, to be honest, I hate being wrong. Like I really do. So when Marty says in that moment where you're being asked to do something and you don't believe in it, you have agency. So I've actually been sitting with that. I'm like, am I abdicating agency in that moment? Is it fair to say, I was told to do this, there was no room to push back, so I did it. And then after it ships, I don't know how to measure success for it because no one cares about measuring success for it. So it's my job to figure out how to measure success for something. And even if I can, I don't know if anyone's going to care. So I'm just not going to do it. Is that me being a
Mm.
shitty PM? Or is that me just literally understanding the environment I'm in and operating in accordance to what is valued? And I think that's the part that
But let's
I
let's
wrestle with.
take that
Yeah.
thought and expand on it a bit, taking Marty's ideology, where you launched a feature that you essentially were forced to launch, you didn't believe in. You measure the results, you wait for the data to come in, and it was a failure. Are you going to go and share it out with a team of people who's ready to move on and say, "Hey, this was a failure"? Because who are they going to blame?
I
Are they
mean,
gonna say, "Oh, yeah, that was a horrible idea"?
you could share. I think it's sensitive because you could make people okay. At its worst, it comes off as I told you so. I wasn't on board with this. I did my best to make it successful. We all did. We rallied. We spent the last 3 months working on this thing. It's out the door now. We executed on the plan to the T. It's been a month since we shipped it. I've been monitoring people exploring the feature, engaging with it, whether it's a drug, ordering this drug, or enrolling in whatever this new program is. It's falling short from what we thought it would do. Now, then I guess the only productive thing you could really do in that moment is to be like, should we take another stab at it? Did we miss the mark? Are there learnings? Are we smarter now about why people are not getting the value out of this thing? Was there a key assumption that we missed? And what's interesting to me is that those things that can become like a CEO level priority in March, by the time you ship it in May, the CEO doesn't even
They
care
don't
about it
care.
anymore. They're on to the next thing. So when you say, hey, like maybe V2 of that thing is a good idea to prioritize because I want to get it right, they're like, nah, it's good enough. Let's move on to the next thing. So you didn't hit the mark. You tried to measure success. You figure out it didn't hit the mark the way you wanted it to. You're trying to be a good steward of what the company cares about and say, hey, let's hit the mark. I think we missed it. Let's take another stab at it. And then at that point, it's no longer a priority. So you have to move on and do the same thing again with something new.
That sounds awfully depressing.
Depends whose perspective, whose shoes you're wearing, right? So if you're the CEO, and this is a key thing that's important, looking at this entire conversation of like empowered product teams, feature teams, we're looking at it from the perspective of the PM because that's who we are.
Right.
But let's put on the shoes of the CEO who wanted that, or the shoes of the VP of product that told you to work on it. I think they're happy. They got what they wanted. They got the news release. They got the press release. They got the thing they can give their sales teams to sell. They got another bullet point for their investor decks or whatever it is that they're sharing with customers and they're trying to sell them a new business. There's a new feature they can just like advertise on the website. They might actually be happy with how that went, even though we as the PM are extremely underwhelmed because we want the impact. Okay. The VP of product delivered what the CEO wanted on time to spec, right? Now, this whole scenario plays out differently if the CEO's expectation isn't just build this, but build this and achieve this outcome,
But the results. Yeah.
right? Now, if there's an outcome, like a specific result that they want, and
Yes.
you miss the mark on that, maybe that's the point where the VP actually pushes back originally. Because the VP is like, I know we can ship this thing. But if you're telling me I have to ship it and I have to hit this result, now the VP has to use their head. And if the VP
Right.
doesn't
So
believe that result is achievable, at that point, they're now going to pay the price if it doesn't hit the result. Or if it does hit the result, they're going to get a lot of rewards for that. And maybe you never even as the PM get the request from the VP if the VP is going to now be accountable for some kind of outcome.
essentially what you're saying is you can't have the cake and eat it too, or whatever that expression is, because if you want the product team to be responsible for the outcome, not for the feature, but for the result, then give the product team the room it needs to reach that result and give them the flexibility and the strategy to get there. If you're
Mm.
saying, I need this result and this is exactly how I need to get there, and if they say, listen, dude, we're not going to get there if we follow these steps, and you tell them, no, you need to do it, then absolve them of ownership of the outcome. Then tell them, if it fails, it's on me. You just launch this. And I think that would even create a healthier dynamic. Because then someone who says, listen, I don't think it's going to accomplish it, but this is my job and I'm doing it. I think that's also fine. I think where this enormous stress on product managers comes from and this huge quitting, there's a weight. I don't know how many product coaches or how many people taking a break from product management. I haven't seen that in any field. People are so burnt out, and I think it's because of that tension and stress of and unrealistic expectations of get this result, but no real path to get there because you're stuck in this path that can't get there.
Yeah, I agree with you. And one of the assumptions we're making is that at the core of what PMs care about and are motivated about is business impact and achieving the right outcomes for the business and for the customers. One reason that's true is because we just want to feel good about what we're doing. We want to feel like we're creating value in the world. The second piece is we're thinking ahead to future interviews and future processes and want to tell better stories about the impact we've had. So we need those bullet points. We need those resume lines, right? But if you set aside that way of thinking about things and you try to think about more like individual psychology level, I think the thing that people are generally motivated by is rewards and incentives. And I think that there's deep, like in the moment, the things that people are motivated by is if they can connect what they're doing to like some kind of reward, it's very motivating. And
What
in
kind of reward are you talking about?
so this is one thing I get to at the bottom of my post is I say, hey, like you've got a couple options if you're in this situation. Either you could try to change the company culture to value the same types of things that we just discussed, like business impact, customer impact, everything should be focused on outcomes because that's aligned with what you need individually as a PM to keep growing in your career and to feel fulfilled every day. That's and as we've discussed, that's challenging. It's a very high risk path to try to pursue. The alternative path that I outline is, hey, maybe you actually just try to get the way that you are measured internally to map more closely to just like rewarding this kind of behavior, right? So, like, essentially embrace the
Mm.
suck. Okay. Now, this is very controversial, and I'm not sure I would even want to operate in that environment, but it is an option that's worth discussing on the table, which is, hey, if I am as a human interested in feeling valued in my company, and the expectations are about outputs.
Yeah.
What I care about is outcomes. And there's a delta between what I care about and what the company seems to value. Then what if there was a way for me to reorient what I care about? And this is the thing that I feel like is taboo to say if you subscribe to the empowered product philosophy. Because what you're essentially saying is I think that there's a world in which I can be an effective PM and be properly rewarded and maybe even be happy working in a feature factory. And I think that the reason it's so draining is because it seems like what we're asked to do in that environment is just like a series of obstacles that get in the way between us and what we care about. But if you could reframe those obstacles as actually, hey, they're just the work that gets you to where you need to be successful in this company. If you want to quit, but like, if you want to stay at this company and this is what they want, then maybe the best thing to do is just get them to reward you doing that job really well. Okay.
Interesting.
And I think it's like cutting edge. Here's the biggest problem. I think that a lot of feature factories are assessing PM performance by empowered product team standards.
Mm.
Okay. This is why I said in the blurb that you read from the post is that you end up getting dinged for neither having impact nor being collaborative, right? Why would you get dinged for not having impact in that scenario that we had? It's not obvious. I'm asking half rhetorically, but I'm also like genuinely, I'm trying
Because
to understand why
because the
you get dinged for that.
expectation was
Yeah,
on outcome. Even though you were given a specific feature set to launch, the success criteria wasn't launching that set of features. The success criteria was the outcome that results from the features you're going to build if it pans out the way the person who's requesting the feature envisions it to. And
right.
if it doesn't, then of course the person who had that idea isn't wrong. Most of those people think of themselves as Elon Musk's or Steve Jobs.
This is my biggest beef, and I've been in this exact situation, and you're told to do something You don't believe in it. You deliver the thing. It doesn't have the impact that you want it to have, and then you're essentially told, "Hey, the work you did didn't have impact, so
Yes.
you can't get promoted, or you're not going to get the exceeds expectations." Even though the execution on the thing was flawless, it didn't hit the mark. And I think that's the thing that I'm trying to poke at with what I'm saying is, if you could solve that mismatch between doing a great job and getting dinged for it not having an impact that you never thought was possible in the first place. This is why, just like, if we put a pin in that for a sec, when I was at Facebook, I saw an alternative way of doing this stuff, right? So that was probably the most empowered product team culture I've been in. Even though Facebook is arguably top down in some ways, I had agency to say no to everyone. Okay. And the reason for
What
that,
did that look like? Can you give an example?
yeah, you set goals when you're at Facebook. It's a very data driven culture, which means when you get evaluated as an individual PM, it happens every 6 months. When I was there, now it's happening once a year, but you put together a packet at the end of every period, and there's a set of bullet points. And the more your bullet points of impact map to real currency by the standards of leadership at Facebook, the more, if you move those metrics, they will reward that. Okay. I happen to be on a team that had one layer removed away from revenue. So
Okay.
our metric on my team, we
Engagement?
knew that if we could move, we were offering guidance for small business advertisers. So we
Okay.
measured the ability to create advertiser value. And we knew that if we could ship something that creates more advertiser value, then there would be more spending to get that value. This is like the TLDR of that. But my team shipped something that moved not just advertiser value, but actually moved revenue in a significant way. And therefore, we got recognition from the chief revenue officer at Facebook was like, awesome, right? Now, in that kind of environment where you can move a top line metric that people care about, all of these other teams that are trying to persuade you to bring stuff into your roadmap. Like we had this business operations team that was like running the call centers. They have 3,000 call center agents. They are the army on the ground that's actually delivering the thing that my team is working on. So when they say, "Hey, we need this thing," I had agency to push back and be like, "Look, here's the metric my team's evaluated against. If I say yes to you, I don't think it moves this metric.
Mm.
So let's keep having this conversation until we land on something that both of us can say with confidence, if we do this thing, if we solve this problem, if we ship this experience, it's going to move this metric." And reorienting those teams from giving me like 50, I'm not kidding, like 50 feature requests that they called problems, but each of them is literally a feature request that they want us to commit to in the next 6 months roadmap, to getting them to, I had agents to be like, "I'm not going to look at that list until you reframe every one of those feature requests to a actual problem statement that I can understand." So those were tense conversations, but I never felt like my job was on the line because I
And
talked to my
Mhm.
manager the whole time about this, and he's like, "Keep doing what you're doing. Like you're applying the exact right kind of pressure on our stakeholders to speak the same language that we need to get rewarded in the performance evaluation process." Okay?
So if we boil it down to why at Facebook you felt empowered to push back and to move the metric you were really responsible for, it sounds like number one, the biggest thing is the incentive system. You were ultimately measured
By
on how much
impact.
you moved right.
Yeah.
But that's not enough because what you're saying is your manager was giving you the ability to push back, because what would have happened if you were measured on impact, but then this team of 3,000 agents would be putting in 3,000 complaints against you, telling you they can't, telling the CEO they can't do their job because your product team is just telling them no all day, and then you would have gotten fired because the company fell apart because Ben didn't do his job.
But this is why it's so important to have alignment all the way up to Zuckerberg in that environment. So there was literally no one in my, I think I was maybe like 6 management layers removed from Zuck at the top, right? There was not a single person in my line of management who I thought would side with the business operations team, because I knew that the better I did in my team, this is how these cultures work, is everyone takes credit for what people under them do.
Mhm.
So if my team is shipping real value and real impact, my manager gets rewarded for that. And then his manager gets rewarded for that. And then their manager gets rewarded for that. So there's a perfect alignment of who is rewarded for what kind of behavior, to the point where my team may have shipped 12 things over the course of 6 months. Like that was often the case. But if one of them moves the needle, that pays the bill for all the stuff that didn't work.
Right.
So having a portfolio of investments, each of which is meant to have an impact, and getting alignment with your manager and your leadership team on what you're saying yes to and why you're saying yes to it. And then they also invest very heavily in data science so that you can actually measure the impact of the things that you will do, and even try to opportunity size before you even start the investment to figure out if there's even a path to having that impact. The whole system is set up so that you as a PM are perfectly positioned to say yes to things that can move the needle and say no to the things that won't.
That was very eye-opening for me. I don't think I've ever been part of an organization that functions that way. Earlier on in the conversation, you said, and you have a whole podcast episode about this. I've heard 2 of your episodes so far. People should go and listen to it. It's called,
Supra Insider.
and
It's me and Mark Baselga, who's the founder of Supra, which is
okay.
a product leader community. We have monthly facilitated sessions with a coach, and we all talk through stuff together once a month. There's also a Slack group, but yeah, it's an interesting community of about 200 product leaders.
Oh, wow. Okay. I want to join that. But so the first episode was about a lot of what we're talking about now. And I highly recommend you go and listen. And the second one was about salary negotiations. There's a third one that I've yet to listen to, but highly recommended. As a product manager who is looking for a company or a role to land in, and let's say they've been through a few frustrating experiences, and maybe they are okay. And I think that's the point of your podcast ultimately. Like, it could be okay to be in a feature factory as long as the environment is set up to support you in that type of setting. But what are the questions and what are the red flags someone should look out for to make those calls before joining a company?
Yeah. So there are things you could ask the people that are in the company right now. They are part of your interview panel and people that are in the seat. And there's things you could do when you ask, maybe back channel and talk to people that are outside of your process slash recently left the company. Regardless of who you ask, I think the goal should be to understand, how does work get defined? Like, who decides what we're going to work on? What's the fundamental process that happens? How do people get rewarded? So, like, when you see people rise up through the PM ladder at this company, what are the things that they do to rise up? At Facebook, I could tell you the people that rose up, they actually moved the needle on some really important stuff. Could have said they got lucky, but they definitely did not strike me as people who just do what they're told to do. Okay. Whereas in some feature factory companies I've seen, it's like the more politically savvy you are, like the more you move up, right? The more you're
Mm.
a yes sir kind of person, you move up. And then I would ask about the things that are currently in the pipeline and what's the origin of these projects? What's the goal of these projects that are in the pipeline that you're most excited about right now? And just try to sniff out whether people are genuinely excited and can tell a story about why the thing they're working on is solving a meaningful problem that's going to move the needle for the business, versus stumbling through an answer to try to rationalize that they're spending time on something that they felt like they couldn't say no to. That's probably like
And
the best way to
Mhm.
know whether you're about to enter a feature factory or not.
And what about if you're talking to someone in leadership in that position? So the person who's supposed to be pushing back or the person who would be giving the mandate or measuring an
Mm.
outcome, they're usually the ones who do think they have a rationale for why one thing will drive impact versus another. So with those people, how do you suss out whether it's product empowered, whether there's room to question those assumptions, or whether it's no, this is what we're doing, period?
I think the first thing, it's like such an important asterisk on anything we say after this, but that VP of product or his chief product officer or director, whoever it is that you're interviewing with, as like, this is, I think, who you're asking about, right?
That or CEO,
Or the
depending on
CEO
this.
even,
Yeah.
right? Like all these people are incentivized to hire you. Like they want to hire someone. They're trying to close people. They don't want to spend forever interviewing. Okay. So no matter what you ask them, they're going to tell you what they think you want to hear to
Mm.
get you to a yes. It's really tricky because, like I said, all product management, performance, ladders, job descriptions, they're leveraging all of the language of empowered product teams. So if someone's going to try to sell you on a role, they're going to try to make it sound as empowered as possible. No one's ever going to hire you and be like, this is a straight up feature factory, right? You have to try to read between the lines. And actually, I would just ask the same questions that I would ask otherwise. Like, what's the last thing you shipped that you're really excited about, and why'd you work on it? What's the thing you're most excited about on the roadmap right now? And what's the origin story of this project? And what's the intended outcome that it's going to have? How do you reward PMs? Can you give me an example of someone who got rewarded in the last like year and what it was that they did to get rewarded? Yeah. What would you say are the most important inputs into the decision of what to work on? It's like, how do you guys decide what to work on? How often do you have that conversation? And then can you tell me about a recent retrospective you did on something you shipped in the last 6 months and how you determined whether it worked or not? Grill the fuck out of them, right? Ask them like the real questions about how they work and what they care about. And either they're going to BS you like crazy, in which case, like, shame on them for lying, or they're going to stumble through answers and you should see right through it. Or option three, they just tell you exactly, hey, look, this is just not that kind of company. Like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to level with you. You are expected to come in and we have extremely opinionated CEO, extremely opinionated sales team. We ship the things we say we're going to ship and we ship them as best as possible. Like, we take an extreme amount of pride in our ability to execute high quality delivery of the things that we build. A lot of this stuff comes in ambiguous. So you're going to have a ton of room to define the solutions and set the direction for them. And we have in place performance systems that really do reward you shipping the things that you commit to. And we're not going to hold you accountable for outcomes because honestly, you'd be set up for failure if we did. That's an option three that no one takes. And I'm wondering why not? Like, why don't more people just say it, right? Just do the thing that you know is going to set people up to be successful in your system and give you what you want. Why not?
Why not? I have an
It,
idea,
I need to
but
think about it more. But I think maybe part of it is that you're worried you're going to lose good people if you say that. No one's going to want to work at your company if you say that. Maybe that's the fear. But
I
in
was
this
thinking
market,
cognitive
yeah.
dissonance, where people want to think, do you eat healthy food? Yeah, I eat healthy food. The fact that I drink a shot here and there and ate a tub of ice cream last night doesn't mean I'm not healthy.
But the dissonance that you think is on the side of the hiring manager?
Yeah, I think a lot of hiring, of course I empower teams. Of course they solve their own problems. Not in this situation. We were on a tight timeline and
But
of course
one day we'll get there. I'm making progress. And if you read the comments on my post, some people are like, yeah, it took me like 3 years to change my company culture to work this way. I'm like,
congrats on having 3 years. What were you
that
thinking?
sounds terrible. You're spending 3 years trying to get people to work. Like, you're just eating shit for 3 years until you get people to like think about things the way you want to think about things. And then even those said it, in keeping it going is as hard.
Yeah.
Right? So I don't know, life's short. Do you really want to spend your time fighting all these battles? There's plenty of other places in life to fight battles. Is the thing you spend 8 hours a day on really the thing that you want to just have baked in tension and conflict every step of
And
the way?
how well are you or the company going to do if it's constant fighting the whole time? So what do you want to leave the listeners with? What's Ben Erez's message?
Just think critically for yourself about the advice that's floating around there, and then don't put people on a pedestal when they say there's a right way to do product management or there's a right way to behave in certain situations. I think there's a lot of nuance to the options that are ahead of you. And I would think for yourself, given your goals, given your constraints, given how you want to spend your time and your energy, there's not one right answer. And I think that sometimes just saying that there's different options ahead of you is the best advice to give. And there's not one right piece of advice that you should embrace. And I don't think you should beat yourself up if you are in an environment that makes behaving a certain way impossible or makes it dangerous. Sometimes the environment around you is bad, and maybe you could try to enjoy that environment more while you figure out the next thing, or just quit. And if you can afford to and make some space to find the next thing on your own, you could take a break from full-time work and do consulting and just try to there's actually in this market right now, a really actionable piece of advice for people is there is a huge appetite in early stage companies to hire people that can just roll up their sleeves and get stuff done for them. And they reward quote unquote delivery, right? Like they just need outputs. They don't need someone to come in and help them be a strategic thought partner. It's like a 10-person team. The founder's a strategic leader. Like, they don't need you for that. So if you want to be in an environment that actually really says, thank you so much. I really needed this help. This is great. Like, I loved working with you and all you did is ship features for them. Like, there are environments where it can actually feel good to do that. And I would just say, just do whatever feels right to you.
Ben, I think your new tagline should be product management for the other 99%.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Um, I really appreciated this conversation. I just feel like it's so down to earth and realistic. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Esty.
If you've gotten this far, thank you for listening to another one of my episodes. Remember to follow the Estee Show on whichever platform you use to listen to podcasts. If you have any feedback, questions, or just want to share your own experiences, don't be shy. hit me up on LinkedIn or email. That's esty.podcast@gmail.com. I'm all ears. Until next time, stay curious, stay bold, and never stop learning.